Snow drifted across the plains in slow, wandering spirals, as if winter itself were trying to gather its thoughts before speaking. The sky carried a bruised shade of blue, dimming into early evening, and the wind hummed low along the frozen earth. It was the kind of cold that made sound feel smaller, softer, like every noise had to push its way through layers of frost before reaching human ears. Ethel Bennet stood at the narrow window of her cabin, fingers curled around a chipped mug for warmth, watching the world beyond her porch dissolve into white. She had lived through many winters, but this one felt heavier, as though the season had settled on her shoulders intentionally instead of simply descending from the sky. The cabin walls creaked with the familiar sighs of wood shrinking in the cold. Ethel breathed slowly, letting the warmth of the firestroke brush against her back. She had spent the last 8 months learning how to live alone again, though to call anything in her life again felt wrong. She had never truly lived alone before. She had simply existed beside a husband who mistook silence for peace and distance for dignity. Now the silence belonged to her, and she was learning how to make it gentle instead of suffocating. Her days passed in quiet rhythm, feeding the horses in the barn, cutting firewood, mending the tear in her shawl for the 4th time, boiling potatoes she had stored beneath the floorboards. Winter reduced life to essentials, and Ethel had learned to manage them with steady hands, even if her heart still trembled beneath them. A soft thump against the outer wall snapped her attention toward the door. She blinked once, listening harder. Sometimes branches snapped under the weight of snow. Sometimes a lone deer brushed against the porch rail. But this sound had weight. It had intention. When she heard it again, louder, closer, her pulse flickered with a spark of fear. She set the mug down, wiped her palms against her skirt, and stepped toward the door. The knock, when it came, was barely a knock at all, more a thud, as if someone had leaned against the wood with the last of their strength. Ethel paused. The closest homestead was a half-day's ride away. No one should have been wandering in this storm. No one sane, at least. She opened the door only a sliver, enough for a needle of icy wind to slip through. Then she froze. A giant stood on her porch. No, not stood, wavered. A towering Apache warrior, broad as the doorway, his skin painted with frost and grief, his breath forming shallow ghosts in the air. His long hair clung to his shoulders, stiff with cold. Snowflakes melted against the heat of his chest, bare, impossibly bare, for he wore no shirt, only a blanket slung unevenly across his back. In his arms he carried 2 bundles wrapped in buckskin and wool, held with a gentleness that didn't match his immense carved-from stone presence. Ethel's breath caught. She opened the door wider without meaning to. The wind rushed in, but the stranger barely seemed to feel it. He spoke her direction, voice low, rough, trembling at the edges. It sounded like a man who had forgotten how speech worked after too many miles of silence. "They have not eaten. Please. Help." His English was accented, broken, but clear enough to pierce her fear. He lowered the bundles slightly, revealing the tiny faces within. 2 newborn infants, their skin pale with cold, their eyelids fluttering weakly. One gave a thin, reedy cry, barely audible above the wind. The other didn't make a sound at all. Ethel felt her entire body lurch forward, as though someone had reached inside her chest and pulled her toward them. The storm, the fear, the impossibility of the moment, none of it mattered. Only the babies did. She flung the door open. "Get inside. Quickly." The man staggered forward, nearly falling to his knees as he crossed the threshold. Ethel shut the door behind him, forcing the wind out and the warmth back in. The warrior bent his head over the babies as if shielding them from everything, even the sudden change of temperature. "Set them by the fire," she said, already moving. "Let me see them." He obeyed without hesitation, lowering onto the rug before the hearth. Ethel could see now how exhausted he was. His hands were shaking uncontrollably, not from fear but from pure cold and starvation. His skin bore patches of frostbite, his lips blue at the corners. Yet his focus never left the infants. Ethel knelt beside him. The babies were tiny, too tiny for a journey through a storm. Their lips were dry. Their breaths were short. The smallest flinched at the heat of the fire, as though unsure whether warmth could be trusted. "How long have they gone without milk?" she asked. He pressed a hand over his face, as if ashamed to speak the truth. Since yesterday morning. Ethel swallowed. That was nearly a full day. A dangerous day. A deadly day in this cold. She moved with sudden purpose. She wrapped one infant inside her shawl, warming him against her own body. Then she held out her arms for the second, and the warrior released him reluctantly, as though every part of him fought the idea of loosening his grip. "The babies need to eat immediately," she said. "I can feed them myself. It's the only way right now." The man bowed his head in a single, trembling motion. "Thank you." Ethel felt something break open quietly inside her chest. Not a crack of pity, but a widening of space, of understanding. This man who towered over her, whose muscles were carved like the sides of mountains, was holding himself together with nothing but love and desperation. He had walked through a winter storm shirtless, carrying 2 newborns. That alone spoke a language deeper than any words. She sat back against the rocking chair, cradling one baby close as he rooted weakly, then latched with frantic need. She breathed out softly, relief coursing through her. The second baby began to fuss, and the warrior hovered beside her, as visibly anxious as a man twice his size could be. She lifted a hand, brushing gently against his arm. "They will be all right. They just need warmth and food. The worst of the danger is passing." He didn't answer, but his shoulders loosened, sinking from their defensive height. His eyes, dark, steady, raw, held gratitude so deep it nearly bowed Ethel's spine. The fire crackled. Snow tapped gently against the window. And in that small cabin, 3 strangers breathed in sync for the first time. Minutes passed. Then 20. Then nearly an hour. The babies drank until their cries softened into soft, contented murmurs. Their cheeks regained a hint of color. Their fingers curled instead of stiffening. Ethel held them both, her arms aching but her heart strangely steady. The warrior, she still did not know his name, sat like a sentinel beside them, but exhaustion pulled heavier with each moment. His eyelids drooped. His breathing slowed. The firelight reflected off the frost still clinging to his hair. Ethel reached for a blanket and draped it around his shoulders. He startled slightly, unused to being tended to, then relaxed into the gesture. "You need to rest," she murmured. He lifted his gaze to hers, and for one heartbeat his expression was not that of a warrior, but of a man stripped down to his last thread of strength. "I will watch them," he whispered. "You already have," she answered softly. "Let me watch now." His head lowered in surrender. He leaned back against the wall, still close enough that their shoulders nearly touched, still in a position that allowed him to see the children. But sleep overtook him in seconds, tugging him into a place he had resisted for far too long. Ethel looked at the 3 of them, 2 newborns safe and swaddled, and a giant of a man crumpled by the fire like a fallen cedar, and felt something shift quietly, almost imperceptibly, within her winter-hardened soul. She didn't know what storm had brought them here or what grief lay behind his exhausted silence, but she knew with sudden clarity that this night was the beginning of something her life had not seen before. Outside, the wind howled across the plains, but inside the cabin, a different kind of silence settled, one that felt less like loneliness and more like the breath before a story begins. And as Ethel leaned back, holding the babies close, she felt the faintest tremor beneath her feet, as if the world itself were exhaling, or warning her that winter had not finished with them yet. Morning crept into the cabin slowly, brushing pale gold across the floorboards as though unsure it belonged here. Ethel woke to the faint crackle of dying embers and the soft rhythmic breaths of the 2 newborns lying against her chest. For a moment, she forgot the storm, the stranger, the weight of the night before. Then her gaze shifted and she saw him, the giant Apache warrior, still propped against the wall, the blanket she draped around him fallen to his waist, his arms crossed instinctively over nothing, as if trying to hold the babies even in sleep. His face, harsh in the firelight the night before, looked younger in the morning hush. Exhaustion softened the angles of his jaw. Frostbite had left its mark on his skin, but the quiet rise and fall of his breath told her he had found some rest at last. Ethel shifted slightly, careful not to wake the infants. Their tiny hands clung to her shawl. Their warmth radiated into her ribs, a small miracle against the bitter cold outside. One of them stirred, giving a weak cry that broke the room's fragile silence. The warrior woke instantly, his eyes snapping open with the sharp awareness of a man who had slept too often in dangerous places. His hand went to the hilt of the knife at his side before he remembered where he was. His gaze moved from Ethel to the babies, then softened in visible relief. "They are hungry again," Ethel murmured. "Newborns are like clockwork." He nodded, his shoulders relaxing. His voice was low, still rough from cold. "They live because of you." Ethel didn't answer. She was focused only on feeding them again, one at a time, while the warrior watched as if memorizing every breath they took. The fire crackled as she leaned back, letting the world narrow to warmth and instinct. The storm outside had not eased. Wind pushed at the windows, begging entry. But here, in the circle of firelight, life continued in quiet defiance. When both babies were fed and wrapped again, Ethel stood carefully and adjusted the shawl around her shoulders. She glanced at the man by the hearth. "You need food too," she said. "And heat. And rest you didn't truly get." He hesitated, as if unsure he deserved any of those things. "Your name," she added softly. "May I ask it?" He looked into the flames, then back at her. "Tejo Red Elk." Ethel nodded once. A strong name, she thought, though she felt saying it aloud might break something sacred in the quiet. She reached for the pot beside the stove, stirring what little stew she had left. Tejo watched every movement, not with suspicion, but with the uncomfortable gratitude of someone unused to receiving kindness. As she handed him the bowl, he whispered, "You should not help me. My people, and yours, do not live in peace." Her gaze held steady. "Today, none of that matters." He lowered his eyes, ashamed of his weakness or perhaps of needing help in the first place. But he ate slowly, savoring each bite as though each spoonful was carrying him back from the edge. The heat returned to his cheeks. His trembling eased. Ethel felt a quiet relief bloom in her chest. When he finished, he set the bowl aside and adjusted the blankets around the babies. His hands, though large and battle-scarred, handled them with care so soft it startled her. Ethel knelt to place more wood in the fire. As she leaned forward, her shoulder brushed his arm. He went still. Not startled, just aware. Aware in a way that made Ethel feel something shift under her ribs. "You said their mother," she began. He nodded once, jaw tightening. "She died when the sun rose yesterday. The birth was hard. Too hard. I buried her before I walked." The words were simple, but they were carved from a place of grief most men never dared show. Ethel bowed her head. "I'm so sorry," she whispered, and the apology felt too small for the weight he carried. Tejo brushed a frostbitten thumb across one baby's cheek. "I promised her they would live." He swallowed. "Even if winter tried to take them." The fire's light flickered across his face, revealing the quiet devastation he had hidden all night. Ethel felt it pulse through her, a mixture of sorrow, respect, and something deeper she couldn't name. She found herself speaking without thinking. "You kept your promise. You brought them here. You saved them." His breath shuddered. "You saved them more." They fell into a gentle rhythm as the day moved on. Ethel showed him how to warm blankets by the stove. Tejo, once his strength returned, repaired the broken hinge on the back door. Ethel washed the buckskin wraps the babies had arrived in, while Tejo whispered soft words in a language she didn't know, singing them into sleep. Every small moment stitched another silent thread between them. Yet beneath the warmth of their new rhythm, Ethel felt a touch of worry. Men from the town rarely ventured this far into the hills, but winter had a way of pushing folks into strange places. And a giant Apache warrior, no matter how gentle his spirit, would not be welcomed kindly if he were found here. She didn't voice the fear, not wanting to tarnish the fragile peace inside the cabin. Still, she caught Tejo glancing toward the window, listening to the storm, as though he sensed danger creeping beyond the trees. Near sunset, while Ethel rocked the babies, Tejo rose to his feet with effort. He stood tall again, his silhouette filling the shadows. "I cannot stay long," he said quietly. "Your kindness, it puts you at risk." Ethel tightened her hold on the little ones. Outside, the wind howled like a warning. Inside, the hearth glowed, the air warm with breath and fire, and something that felt frighteningly close to hope. She looked up at him, her voice steadier than she felt. "The risk of turning you away would be far greater." He blinked, startled by the conviction in her tone. Snow began falling again, heavier than before. Teho stepped closer to the window, watching the forest drown beneath white. His shoulders tensed. "Someone has been here," he murmured. "Footprints beyond the trees. Not mine." Ethel felt the world tilt beneath her feet. The babies slept on, unaware of the storm gathering outside, or the one building quietly inside the man who had carried them through the night. Teho turned toward her, worry tightening every muscle in his body. Winter had brought him to her door. Now something else was coming. The storm eased sometime in the night, leaving a thin veil of silence stretched across the land by morning. Ethel woke to the faint glow of winter sunlight slipping beneath the curtains, painting long, pale strokes across the wooden floor. The twins were curled against her, their breaths soft and steady. For the first time since they had arrived, they looked like children who expected to see another sunrise. The warmth of that thought wrapped around her heart like a shawl. Teho sat by the window with his back straight, and his gaze fixed on the forest beyond the cabin. He looked carved from the morning light, still, watchful, carrying a quiet tension through every sinew. Ethel wondered if he slept at all, or merely drifted in and out of the edge of wakefulness. Even in the gentleness of dawn, he held himself like a man expecting danger to step out of the trees at any moment. "You're awake early," Ethel whispered as she rose, careful not to jostle the babies. He turned his head slightly. "I heard the snow shift. Nothing more." His tone was calm, but something beneath it carried concern, as though the land itself had whispered warnings he couldn't yet interpret. Ethel walked to the stove and fed the fire, coaxing warmth back into the room. As the flames grew, the cabin felt less like a refuge borrowed from the storm, and more like a home reclaiming its breath. She brewed a small pot of tea with the last leaves she possessed, their earthy scent curling around the air. Teho accepted the cup she offered with a nod, his fingers brushing hers briefly, a touch so light it felt like an accident, yet she felt it echo through her like a soft ache. The day settled into motion. Ethel fed the twins while Teho fixed the loose plank near the door. When one of the babies cried, he crossed the room so quickly it startled Ethel, as though every sound from his children struck directly at his core. She handed the infant to him, watching the way his giant hands cradled the fragile body with practiced gentleness. Teho rocked the child with a quiet rhythm, humming under his breath. Ethel couldn't understand the song, but the melody wrapped around her like smoke from a warm fire, steady, ancient, mournful. The hours passed that way, woven together by small tasks that felt heavier with meaning than anything she had done since her husband's passing. Ethel showed Teho how to warm goat's milk on the stove without scalding it. He showed her how to secure the shutters so the sharpest winds wouldn't seep in. She shared small pieces of her childhood, stories her mother told her by lantern light, while Teho shared fragments of his late wife's laughter, her skill with beadwork, her stubborn hope for their children's future. He spoke sparingly, each word chosen with intent, but Ethel learned quickly that silence, for him, was not a barrier. It was a language. By midday, the sky had cleared enough for a thin sheet of sunlight to kiss the snow. Teho stepped outside to gather more firewood from the nearby pile, and Ethel followed him with the twins bundled against her chest. The cold bit at her cheeks, but the air felt sharp with clarity instead of danger. She watched Teho split kindling with swift, clean strikes, his muscles flexing beneath the worn blanket wrapped around him. There was strength in him, yes, but also restraint. Even his breath in the icy air seemed measured, as if he feared disturbing the quiet the land had finally offered. When he caught her watching him, she looked away quickly. But he didn't tease or question. Instead, he returned to her side and gently touched the edge of the blanket around the babies. "They look stronger today," he murmured. "Thanks to you," Ethel replied. Teho shook his head. "Thanks to you. They would not live if not for your courage." Ethel felt warmth rise beneath her skin. Courage was not a word she had heard often, especially not directed toward her. It sat strangely in her chest, unfamiliar yet hopeful. They returned inside, and for a moment the cabin felt smaller, but not with discomfort. More like the way a heart expands, reshaping its walls to make space for something unexpected. The twins slept, their faces rosy with newfound strength. Ethel laid them in a basket lined with soft cloth, and Tejo settled on the floor beside them, his presence a constant shield. A quiet peace embraced them as afternoon drifted toward dusk. Ethel prepared soup, stirring slowly as the fragrant steam filled the room. Tejo watched her with an expression she couldn't decipher at first: respect, gratitude, something gentler beneath. He rose and approached her, taking the ladle from her hand so he could stir while she rested. The gesture was small, but it struck her deeply. Kindness shared by a man who owed her nothing felt like a rare and sacred gift. As they ate, Tejo's voice softened. "I thought I would die on the way here. The storm, it was too strong. I kept thinking, if I fall, the babies fall with me." Ethel listened, her breath caught in her throat. "I walked until I could no longer feel my legs. I walked because my wife asked me with her last breath to keep them safe." He swallowed hard. "I did not know where else to go. I followed the smoke from your chimney. I hoped it meant Mercy lived here." Ethel reached across the table and touched his hand lightly. "Mercy lives where it is needed," she whispered. "Not where it is deserved." His eyes widened slightly, as though the words awakened something long dormant in him. Evening settled slowly, draping the cabin in a hush of blue shadows. The twins woke again, fussing, and Ethel lifted them with practiced ease. Tejo stood beside her, close enough that she could feel the heat radiating from him. Their arms brushed as they worked together to soothe the children, their movements harmonizing without thought. Ethel didn't know when she began leaning slightly toward him, or when he stopped shifting away. She only knew that each breath felt shared, each moment braided with unspoken understanding. When the twins finally slept, Ethel and Tejo remained beside the fire, the silence between them no longer empty. Outside, the wind gathered again, whispering against the cabin walls like distant footsteps. Ethel stiffened, glancing at the window. Tejo followed her gaze, his expression sharpening. "Someone came near earlier," he murmured. "Their tracks were fresh. Not from my people. Not from animals." Ethel's pulse quickened. "Do you think they saw the cabin light?" Tejo listened to the wind, his jaw tightening. "Perhaps. Or perhaps they were searching for something, or someone." Fear brushed her spine, cold as the snow outside. Tejo turned to her, his voice quiet but firm. "If they return, I will protect you. Protect them. Whatever comes." The fire flickered across his face, revealing a vow carved in stone. Ethel swallowed, a tremor running through her, not of fear, but of something deeper. Something that felt dangerously close to trust. The babies slept peacefully between them, unaware that the world outside was shifting, tightening, closing in. And as the wind howled anew, as if delivering a warning wrapped in cold, Ethel realized with startling clarity that the family forming inside her cabin had already placed a target on its own fragile warmth. Snow returned in the night, falling with a hush that felt deliberate, as if winter wished to hide the world beneath its careful weight. Ethel woke to the soft stir of cold light gathering along the cabin floorboards, the kind of pale dawn that offered no warmth yet still felt like a promise. The twins slept tucked against her side, small breaths rising and falling with a fragile steadiness. Across the room, Tejo sat near the window, unmoving except for the slow lift of his shoulders with each breath. He had not slept. She sensed it instantly in the sharpened lines of his posture, and the alert stillness in his eyes. Ethel rose quietly and fed the stove, letting the room fill with heat that pushed back the morning chill. "You heard something again," she whispered. Tejo didn't turn, but the faint dip of his chin answered her. "Snow carries footsteps farther. Someone walked near the tree line before sunrise." Ethel felt a tremor beneath her ribs. She had known this valley for years. She recognized when its silence shifted. Though she said nothing more, she caught Tejo watching her, as if measuring whether she felt fear or resolve. Maybe both lived inside her. The morning unfolded in gentle motions. Ethel warmed milk for the newborns. Tejo fixed the draft that seeped through the cabin roof, and for a few fragile moments the world looked almost peaceful. But the tension beneath the tasks never fully dissolved. When Ethel stepped outside to gather snow for melting, she noticed the faint indentation of boot prints near the ridge, softened only slightly by fresh snowfall. Her breath caught. These were not the tracks of a single traveler. And they were close. Returning inside, she found Tejo rocking one of the babies, the other curled safely beneath a blanket. His voice was a low hum, a melody that seemed older than the land itself. Ethel hesitated before speaking. There were tracks. Men's tracks. Tejo's grip on the child tightened just enough for her to notice. They search for me. Or for something they fear. Ethel shook her head. They don't know what they fear. That's the danger. Tejo met her gaze, sorrow flickering behind his steadiness. I bring trouble by staying. He began gathering his few belongings, wrapping them with slow resignation. You're leaving, Ethel said, barely able to breathe the words. Tejo didn't answer at first. When he did, his voice was deep with quiet pain. If danger returns, it should find me far from here. Ethel stepped toward him, her heart pounding. If you leave, they'll follow your tracks. If you stay, at least you're not alone. Tejo paused, caught between two impossible choices. The twins stirred, soft cries threading through the room. Ethel brushed their cheeks gently. They need their father. The words trembled in the air, heavier than snow. Before Tejo could speak, the crunch of footsteps echoed outside. Slow, deliberate, too heavy to belong to deer. Ethel's breath froze. Tejo moved to the window, shoulders tensing. 3 riders emerged from the trees, their silhouettes stark against the white. Men from town. Men who saw danger where compassion lived. Ethel's pulse raced. Hide, she whispered. Tejo slipped behind the stove, shadow swallowing his frame. The knock thundered through the cabin. Ethel steadied herself, lifted the twins, and opened the door just enough to meet Edgar Holt's cold stare. Mornin', Ethel, he drawled. Snow shows someone passed close. Someone big. Ethel held his gaze. Storm covers a lot. Hard to know what's what. Edgar's eyes drifted to the twins. Didn't know you had little ones. Ethel kept her voice steady. I'm caring for them. Their mother died. Edgar grunted. Shame. But doesn't explain the tracks outside. Behind her, a floorboard creaked softly. Edgar's eyes narrowed. Someone's here. His hand moved toward his rifle. Ethel stepped outside, blocking the doorway with her body. You scare these children, and I'll make you regret it. Edgar blinked, taken aback by the steel in her tone. After a moment, he spat into the snow. If I see anything strange, I won't be so gentle. He turned his horse, riding off into the trees with the others following. When they vanished, Ethel closed the door and exhaled shakily. Tejo stepped from the shadows, his expression a mixture of gratitude and grief. You protected us, he murmured. Ethel looked up at him, her heartbeat still racing with fear and something warmer. And I'll do it again. But as she spoke, the wind rose suddenly, pressing against the cabin walls with a force that felt like an omen. Tejo returned to the window, eyes narrowing. They'll be back, he whispered. And next time, they won't come with questions. Night settled early, thick and heavy, as if winter wanted to smother every fragile warmth inside the cabin before it could bloom into courage. Ethel moved through the dim light with steady hands, though her heart trembled beneath her ribs in a rhythm she could not calm. The twins slept swaddled in their basket, their tiny breaths rising like small prayers toward the ceiling beams. Tejo stood near the door, silent, listening to the wind sweep across the snowfields like a restless hunter searching for its prey. He looked carved from darkness and firelight both, a man caught between leaving and staying, between fear and devotion. Ethel watched him through the quiet, sensing a storm within him that threatened to break long before the one waiting outside. She approached slowly, as though nearing a wild creature who might flee or collapse. His gaze lifted to her, full of questions he hadn't dared speak. You don't have to go, Ethel whispered. Not tonight. Not while danger circles us like wolves around a dying flame. Tejo's jaw tightened. If they return, they will not come with talk. They will come with rifles. Ethel stepped closer, her voice softer. Then let them see we are not afraid. Tejo shook his head, sorrow heavy in his eyes. They will see me, not us. And men like them see only threat where there is simply life trying to survive. He looked toward the twins, his voice breaking. I will not let them suffer for what I am. Ethel felt her breath crumble. You are a father carrying his children through winter. That is what you are. Nothing more. Nothing less. His eyes softened, and for a heartbeat she saw the depth of his exhaustion, the ache of a man stretched thin by grief and duty. He reached for one baby's small hand, brushing a fingertip across their knuckles, as if memorizing the texture of love before stepping into danger alone. Ethel touched his arm, feeling the warmth beneath his hardened skin. If you walk out into that night alone, you will not return. The snow will take you or the rifles will. And then what becomes of them? What becomes of me? Taeho turned sharply at her last words, surprise flickering across his face. Of you? Ethel's voice shook but did not break. You think you're the only one with something to lose? He took a step toward her, the fire casting gold along the planes of his chest. Tell me, he murmured, barely breathing. What would you lose? Ethel swallowed. The cabin felt too small for truth, too fragile for the weight of what she had carried unspoken. I would lose the only warmth this winter has given me. I would lose the children I've come to love. And I would lose you, Taeho. And that, she paused, breath trembling, is something I cannot bear. His expression shattered. Quietly, completely. He reached for her hand, lifting it to his chest, where his heartbeat thudded fast and uneven. Ethel, he whispered, her name breaking like a promise in the air. But whatever answer he intended to speak dissolved as the wind outside shifted, carrying the unmistakable crunch of hooves across frozen earth. Taeho stiffened. They're here. Ethel grabbed the rifle her late husband once owned, though the weight of it felt foreign in her hands. Taeho took it gently from her. No. I stand first. You stay behind me. Ethel refused. I won't hide while you stand between death and this home. The babies whimpered in their basket, as if sensing the storm pressing against the walls. Taeho pushed the table against the door, his movements deliberate, controlled, carved by long experience. Ethel moved beside him, handing him ammunition with shaking hands. Voices rose outside, rough, cold, dripping suspicion. Edgar's voice cut through the wind. Ethel Bennett. Open that door or we'll open it for you. Taeho placed a hand on the door, leaning close enough that the wood groaned beneath his strength. Ethel pressed her palm to his back, feeling the heat of him, the steadiness he carried like a shield. The men forced the latch, the door jolting inward. Snow spilled across the floor like a white gasp of the world outside. Edgar stepped in with two others behind him, rifles raised. His eyes widened at the sight of Taeho standing tall between them and the cradle. Move aside, Edgar growled. That Apache's coming with us. Dead or alive makes no difference. Ethel stepped forward before she realized her feet had moved. No. Edgar's face hardened. He's dangerous. Ethel shook her head, her voice trembling with fury. Dangerous men don't carry newborns through blizzards. Dangerous men don't ask for milk. Dangerous men don't fall to their knees at a stranger's door begging for life instead of taking it. Edgar aimed his rifle at Taeho's chest. Last warning, Ethel. Step back. Ethel moved in front of Taeho, her body the only barrier between him and the rifles. Then you shoot through me, Edgar Holt. Because I won't move. Edgar faltered. The other men hesitated. For a heartbeat, the storm itself seemed to still, waiting. Taeho placed a hand on Ethel's shoulder, gently guiding her behind him. His voice rose, not in threat, but in truth. I will not fight you unless you harm them. But I will not leave my children. Not again. Edgar's eyes flicked to the basket, to the tiny hands curled in sleep. Something shifted in the hard line of his jaw. The men behind him lowered their rifles just slightly, confusion tugging at their certainty. Ethel stepped beside Taeho again, her voice steady. Let them be. Let us be. Winter already took enough from him. Don't let hatred take the rest. Edgar looked at the twins, small, helpless, undeniably human, and his breath cracked. He lowered his rifle. Let's go, he muttered to the others. They turned, leaving the doorway open to the howling wind. When the last hoofbeat faded, Ethel turned to Taeho. His breath trembled, his chest rising and falling with the weight of what almost happened. She stepped into his arms without thinking, without hesitation, letting her forehead rest against his heartbeat. His hands closed around her gently, reverently, as if afraid she might dissolve. "Ethel," he whispered, voice thick with emotion. "I tried not to feel this. I told myself grief had no room for anything more. But you, your kindness, your courage, you have become the heartbeat I follow. You saved my children. You saved me. I love you. With everything left in me, I love you." Ethel lifted her face, her breath warm against his lips. "And I love you, Tejo Red Elk. You walked into my winter, and brought a life I thought I'd lost." The twins stirred softly, the fire crackled, and the world felt suddenly bright, even beneath snow. Tejo held her close, as though anchoring his soul to something he had never expected to find. Outside, winter howled, but inside, a promise took shape. Quiet, warm, unbreakable. A family, once scattered, now bound by mercy, courage and love.